The telegram had arrived 3 weeks ago, and Natalie Carter had cried over every word, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life as the train carried her farther and farther from Philadelphia toward the Arizona territory. She pressed her forehead against the warm glass window, watching the landscape transform from green hills to endless stretches of brown earth and scattered sagebrush, feeling her stomach twist with anxiety about the man waiting for her in Nogales, a man she had never met but had agreed to marry. The year was 1883, and the Wild West was still wild enough to make a proper Eastern lady question her sanity. Natalie was 22 years old, orphaned 6 months prior, when both her parents had succumbed to influenza within days of each other. The boarding house where she had taken a room after selling their modest home had been tolerable at first, but the landlady's nephew had grown increasingly aggressive in his unwanted attentions. When she saw the advertisement in the newspaper for men seeking wives in the territories, she had written to 3 different addresses. Only one had written back with any real substance. Russell Bennett had described himself as a rancher with a small but growing cattle operation outside Nogales. His letters had been honest about the hardships, the isolation, the work required to build a life in Arizona. But they had also been kind, thoughtful, asking her about her interests and dreams rather than just her cooking skills and tolerance for hard work. He had sent a photograph that showed a tall man with dark hair and serious eyes, standing beside a horse. She had sent her own photograph in return, along with a letter accepting his proposal. Now, as the train began to slow, the conductor walking through the car announcing Nogales as the next stop, Natalie felt panic rising in her chest like flood water. What if Russell took one look at her and was disappointed? What if she could not bear the harsh territory life? What if she had made a terrible mistake leaving behind everything familiar? Her reflection in the window showed a pale face with large dark eyes, brown hair pinned up under a simple hat, and a dress that had been fashionable in Philadelphia but looked too formal and Eastern for this dusty land. She was attractive enough, she supposed, though not a great beauty. She was educated, well-read, and capable with numbers and household management. But would any of that matter here? The train lurched to a stop, and Natalie's heart hammered so hard she felt dizzy. She gathered her carpet bag and her small trunk, which a porter helped her carry to the platform. The moment her feet touched the wooden boards of the Nogales station, the full reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She was hundreds of miles from everything she knew, about to meet a stranger she had promised to marry, with barely enough money left to buy a return ticket even if she wanted to run. The tears came suddenly and uncontrollably, spilling down her cheeks as she stood there clutching her bag, feeling utterly lost and alone. The platform was crowded with people, but she had never felt more isolated in her life. She tried to compose herself, to wipe her face with her handkerchief, but the tears kept coming, born of exhaustion and grief and fear all tangled together. "Miss Carter." The voice was deep and gentle, and when Natalie looked up through her blurred vision, she saw a tall man in dusty work clothes and a worn hat standing a few feet away. He had kind eyes, concerned and warm, and he was holding his hat in his hands respectfully. This was Russell Bennett, it had to be, and she was crying all over their first meeting like a fool. "I am so sorry," she managed to say, her voice breaking. "I did not mean to make such a spectacle. I am just overwhelmed." Russell stepped closer, pulling a clean bandana from his pocket. Without hesitation, he gently wiped the tears from her cheeks, his touch surprisingly tender for such rough hands. His eyes met hers with an expression of such understanding and kindness that it made her chest ache. "Welcome home, Natalie," he said softly, and something in the way he said it, in the certainty and warmth of those words, made her breath catch. "You have had a long journey, and I imagine it took a lot of courage to come here. There is no shame in tears. But you are safe now, and I give you my word that I will do everything in my power to make you glad you came." She stared at him, still sniffling but feeling the panic begin to subside. His face was weathered from sun and wind, lined around the eyes in a way that spoke of squinting at horizons. He was probably in his late 20s, she guessed, and there was a steadiness about him that was immediately reassuring. This was not a man who made promises lightly. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the bandana and dabbing at her eyes. "I apologize for being so emotional. It is not how I wanted us to meet." "I think it is exactly how we were meant to meet," Russell said, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him more closely. "Real and honest. I appreciate that more than you know. Now, let me get your trunk and we will head to the hotel. I have taken a room for you there so you can rest tonight. Tomorrow, if you feel ready, I will show you the ranch, but there is no rush. We can take whatever time you need." His thoughtfulness surprised her. She had expected to be rushed into marriage immediately, or taken straight out to some remote cabin. Instead, he was giving her space to breathe, to adjust. As he lifted her trunk easily onto his broad shoulder and offered his other arm to her, Natalie felt the first stirring of hope that perhaps this leap of faith might not be a mistake after all. Nogales was a small town straddling the border with Mexico, a mix of adobe buildings and wooden structures, with wide, dusty streets and mountains rising in the distance. The air was dry and hot, so different from the humid summers she was used to in Philadelphia. Mexican vendors called out their wares in Spanish, cowboys tied their horses to hitching posts, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of hammering and shouting. It was rough and unpolished, but there was an energy to the place that was undeniably alive. Russell led her to a modest but clean hotel, where the proprietor, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Hernandez, greeted them warmly. Russell had clearly spoken to her in advance, because the woman gave Natalie a kind smile and immediately showed them to a room on the second floor with a window overlooking the main street. "You rest now," Mrs. Hernandez said in accented English. "I bring you water for washing and some food, yes. You must be tired from such a journey." "That would be wonderful, thank you," Natalie said gratefully. Russell set her trunk down and then turned to face her, holding his hat in his hands again. "I will be staying at the boarding house down the street," he said. "But I will come by in the morning, say around 9 if that suits you. We can have breakfast together, and you can ask me any questions you might have. I know we are essentially strangers, and I want you to feel comfortable with all of this." Natalie nodded, feeling tired down to her bones but also touched by his consideration. "That sounds good. Russell, I want you to know that I am committed to honoring my agreement. I know I must have seemed like a weeping mess on the platform, but I am stronger than that. I will not disappoint you." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, something that looked almost like admiration. "Natalie, any woman who leaves everything she knows to start over in a place like this has more courage than most men I know. You could never disappoint me. Sleep well, and I will see you tomorrow." After he left, Natalie sank onto the bed, exhausted but no longer crying. Mrs. Hernandez brought her a pitcher of water and a basin, along with a plate of warm tortillas, beans, and some kind of spiced meat that smelled delicious. She ate mechanically, washed the travel dust from her face and hands, and then lay down fully clothed on top of the blankets. Within minutes, she was asleep, dreaming of serious eyes and a gentle voice saying, "Welcome home." Morning came bright and hot, the sunlight streaming through the window so fiercely that Natalie woke up squinting. For a moment she forgot where she was, and then it all came rushing back. Arizona, Nogales, Russell Bennett. Her new life, whatever that would turn out to be. She rose and did her best to make herself presentable, changing into a simpler day dress and repinning her hair. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror looked more composed than yesterday, though her eyes still held uncertainty. A knock at the door made her jump, but it was only Mrs. Hernandez with more water and a friendly smile. "Mr. Bennett, he is downstairs waiting for you. Such a good man, that one. You are lucky." Natalie hoped that was true. She took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and made her way downstairs. Russell was standing near the entrance, clean-shaven now and wearing a pressed shirt that looked like he had made an effort. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that transformed his serious features. "Good morning," he said. "You look rested. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," she admitted. The bed was comfortable. They walked together to a small restaurant a few buildings down, where Russell clearly knew the owner. They were seated at a corner table, and he ordered breakfast for both of them after checking what she might like. As they waited for the food, an awkward silence settled between them, the kind that comes when two people know they should talk but are not sure where to start. "Tell me about your ranch," Natalie finally said, deciding to be direct. "Your letters mentioned cattle, but I confess I know very little about ranching." Russell leaned forward, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup, and she could see his passion for the subject in the way his eyes brightened. "I have about 300 acres about 8 miles from town," he said. "It is not a huge operation, but it is growing. I have around 70 head of cattle right now, and I am building my herd slowly. I have 2 horses, some chickens, and a dog named Scout who thinks he runs the whole place. The house is small but sturdy. I built it myself 3 years ago when I first claimed the land. It has 2 rooms right now, but I have been adding on a third, which I hope to finish before winter." "You built it yourself?" Natalie asked, impressed despite herself. "With help from some neighbors," he said. "That is how things work out here. When someone needs to raise a barn or build a house, folks come together to help. Then you return the favor when they need it. It is a good system." The food arrived, plates piled high with eggs, bacon, biscuits, and fried potatoes. Natalie ate slowly, listening as Russell talked more about the ranch, about the challenges of water in this dry climate, about the threats from rustlers and the occasional mountain lion, about his dreams of expanding the herd and maybe adding some horses to breed and sell. "It is hard work," he said honestly, meeting her eyes. "I will not lie to you about that. There are days when I am up before dawn and do not stop until well after dark. Summers are brutally hot and winters can be surprisingly cold. But it is my land, my future. I wanted to share that with someone, to build something lasting. That is why I wrote that advertisement." "Why did you choose me?" Natalie asked softly. "I am sure you had other responses." Russell was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I had 4 letters total," he said. 3 of them focused entirely on what the women wanted from me, what they expected me to provide. Your letter was different. You asked me about my life, my interests, what I hoped for. You told me about your love of reading, your skill with numbers, your parents. You wrote like you saw me as a person, not just a means to an end. That mattered to me." Natalie felt warmth spread through her chest. She remembered that letter, how she had tried to be genuine rather than just impressive. "I appreciate your honesty," she said, "and I want to be honest too. I am frightened, Russell. I have never been west of Pennsylvania before this trip. I have never cooked over a wood stove or dealt with cattle or handled any of the things that will be required of me here. But I am willing to learn, and I am not afraid of hard work." "That is all I can ask," Russell said, and his smile was so warm that Natalie felt herself smiling back. "I am not expecting you to know everything already. I will teach you what you need to know and we will figure the rest out together. But I want you to be sure about this, Natalie. Marriage is permanent, or it should be. If you have doubts, if you want to return to Philadelphia, I will understand and I will pay for your ticket. I do not want you to feel trapped." The offer was so generous that Natalie felt tears threatening again, but this time from gratitude rather than fear. "I do not want to go back," she said quietly. "There is nothing for me there. My parents are gone, I have no siblings, and the few friends I had were not close enough to matter. I want to make a life here. I want to try." "Then we will try together," Russell said, and he reached across the table to gently take her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was careful, respectful. "How about this? Come out to the ranch today, see the place, get a feel for it. If you still feel good about things, we can get married in a few days. The circuit judge will be through Nogales next week. That gives us time to get to know each other a little better without any pressure. Does that sound fair?" "More than fair," Natalie agreed, feeling the knot in her stomach loosen a bit more. "Thank you for being so patient with me." "You are worth being patient for," Russell said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. After breakfast, Russell helped her into a buckboard wagon hitched to a sturdy brown horse. They rode out of Nogales heading north, the road dusty and rough but passable. The landscape was unlike anything Natalie had ever seen, all browns and dusty greens, with strange spiky plants Russell identified as ocotillo and kala cactus. The mountains rose in the distance, jagged and imposing against the brilliant blue sky. The air smelled of dust and sage, and something else she could not name, something wild and open. Russell pointed out landmarks as they drove: the creek bed that would run with water during the summer monsoons, the particular hill that marked the boundary of his property, the place where he had once encountered a black bear that had been just as startled to see him as he had been to see it. He talked easily, and Natalie found herself relaxing into the conversation, asking questions and listening to his stories. When they finally reached the ranch, Natalie felt her breath catch. The house was indeed small, a sturdy wooden structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney. But it looked solid and well built, with real glass windows and a door that hung straight. There was a barn behind it, a small corral with 2 horses, and a chicken coop from which she could hear clucking. The land around it rolled gently, dotted with cattle in the distance, and beyond that, the open range stretched toward the mountains. "It is beautiful," Natalie said, and she meant it. There was something about the openness, the space, that called to something in her she had not known existed. Russell helped her down from the wagon, and immediately a large dog came bounding up, tail wagging furiously. "This is Scout," Russell said, laughing as the dog sniffed Natalie enthusiastically. "He looks fierce, but he is friendly as they come." Natalie bent to pet the dog, who licked her hand happily. She found herself smiling despite her nervousness. Russell showed her around the property, introducing her to the horses, a mare named Daisy and a gelding named Duke. He showed her the chicken coop with its dozen hens and 1 proud rooster, the vegetable garden he had been trying to maintain with limited success, and finally, the inside of the house. The interior was simple but clean. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one, with a wood stove, a table with 4 chairs, and a couple of simple armchairs near the fireplace. A door led to what was clearly Russell's bedroom, and another led to the room he had been working on adding. "I know it is not fancy," Russell said, looking almost apologetic, "but it is solid, and it stays cool in summer and warm in winter. I made most of the furniture myself." "It is wonderful," Natalie said, running her hand along the smooth surface of the table. "You are clearly skilled with your hands." Russell showed her around the kitchen area, explaining his systems for storing food, where the well was for water, how the stove worked. He was thorough and patient, never making her feel foolish for not knowing things. When she asked about laundry and bathing, he showed her the large tub he had fashioned, and the area behind the house where he had rigged up a privacy screen. "It is not exactly a fancy bathroom," he said with a self-deprecating smile, "but it works. In winter, we heat water on the stove and bring it inside for bathing." They spent the afternoon together, and Russell showed her more of the property. He taught her how to scatter feed for the chickens and collect eggs, how to approach the horses gently, how to read the landscape for signs of water and weather changes. He was a good teacher, patient and encouraging, and Natalie found herself absorbing the information eagerly. There was something deeply satisfying about learning these practical skills, about beginning to understand this new world. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat together on the porch steps, watching the cattle move slowly across the distant pasture. Scout lay at their feet, content and peaceful. "What do you think?" Russell asked quietly. "Can you see yourself here?" Natalie looked out at the land, at the vast open sky, at the man sitting beside her who had been nothing but kind and patient. She thought about Philadelphia, about the cramped boarding house and her limited prospects there. She thought about the fear she had felt stepping off that train. And then she thought about how Russell had wiped her tears and said welcome home, and how right those words had felt despite everything. "Yes," she said softly. "I can see myself here. I want to try." Russell turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was one of pure relief and joy. "I am glad," he said. "More glad than I can say. I promise you, Natalie, I will work hard to make you happy here. You will never regret this choice if I have anything to say about it." "I believe you," Natalie said, and realized she meant it. They drove back to town as twilight fell, and Russell left her at the hotel with plans to pick her up the next morning. Over the following days, they fell into a pattern. Russell would come into town to see her, sometimes taking her back out to the ranch, sometimes just walking with her around Nogales, introducing her to shopkeepers and neighbors. He bought her sturdy boots better suited to ranch life and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her face from the fierce sun. Natalie met some of the other women in town, including Sarah Martinez, who ran the general store with her husband and took an immediate liking to Natalie. Sarah was warm and talkative, full of practical advice about life in Arizona and not shy about asking questions. "So you are going to marry Russell Bennett?" Sarah asked one afternoon while showing Natalie around the store. "He is a good man. Quiet but good. He came to town 3 years ago with nothing but a horse and some determination, and he has built that ranch from scratch. Folks respect him." "He seems very kind," Natalie said, examining a display of preserved goods. "Kind and lonely," Sarah said perceptively. "A man like that needs a wife, someone to build a life with. I think you two will be good for each other. You have that same quiet strength about you." Natalie hoped Sarah was right. As the days passed and she spent more time with Russell, she found herself growing genuinely fond of him. He made her laugh with his dry humor, impressed her with his knowledge and skills, and treated her with a respect she had rarely experienced. He never tried to rush her or make unwanted advances. He was content to talk, to share stories, to simply spend time together. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset, Russell told her about his past. He had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 4 sons. His father had been a farmer, struggling to make ends meet on land that never seemed to produce enough. When Russell was 18, he had headed west looking for opportunities, working various jobs before finally saving enough to claim his own land here in Arizona territory. "My brothers all stayed in Texas," he said. "Got married, took over portions of my father's farm when he passed. We write occasionally, but I have not seen them in 5 years. Sometimes I miss them, but I do not regret leaving. This is where I was meant to be. You ever get lonely?" Natalie asked softly. "I did," Russell admitted, looking at her with those serious eyes. "That is why I sent for a bride. I wanted someone to share this with, someone who could be a true partner. I hope that can be you, Natalie. I hope we can build something real together." "I hope so too," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. The day before the circuit judge was due to arrive, Russell took Natalie out to the ranch one more time. They stood together in the main room of the house, and he turned to face her with an expression of nervous determination. "I know this has been quick," he said, "and I know we are still learning about each other, but I want you to know that I care for you, Natalie. These past days have been the best I have had in a long time. I think we could be happy together. But if you have any doubts, any hesitations, now is the time to say so. I will not hold it against you." Natalie looked at this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and patience, who had wiped her tears on a train platform and made her feel welcome in a strange land. She thought about the way her heart lifted when she saw him, the way his smile made her feel warm inside, the way his presence made her feel safe and valued. It was not the passionate romance of novels, not yet, but it was something real and good, something with the potential to grow into something beautiful. "I have no doubts," she said clearly. "I want to marry you, Russell. I want to build a life here with you." His face transformed with relief and joy, and he reached out to take both her hands in his. "Thank you," he said softly. "You will not regret it, I swear to you." The next day, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Nogales with Mrs. Hernandez and Sarah Martinez as witnesses, Natalie Carter became Natalie Bennett. Russell had bought her a simple gold band that he slipped onto her finger with trembling hands, and when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her gently, respectfully, a promise of more to come but not a demand. They had a small celebration dinner at the hotel, with a few of Russell's neighbors and friends joining them. It was not the elaborate wedding Natalie had once imagined as a girl, but it was warm and genuine, and she felt welcomed by this small community in a way that touched her deeply. As the evening wound down and she and Russell prepared to ride out to the ranch together, to begin their married life, Natalie felt nervous but also excited. The ranch house looked different in the moonlight, silvery and peaceful. Russell helped her down from the wagon and carried her small trunk inside. Scout greeted them enthusiastically, and Russell laughed, pushing the dog gently outside and closing the door. Inside, Natalie stood in the main room, suddenly feeling shy. She was a married woman now, and she knew what was expected on a wedding night, but she was also nervous. Russell seemed to sense her uncertainty because he did not move toward her right away. Instead, he lit a few lamps, casting warm light around the room. "Natalie," he said gently, "I know this is all happening fast. If you need time, if you want to wait before we are truly husband and wife in every sense, I will understand. There is no rush." His consideration made her love him a little bit in that moment, though she would not have called it love yet. "I appreciate that," she said softly, "but we are married, and I want this marriage to be real. I am just nervous." Russell crossed the room to her, moving slowly, giving her time to back away if she wanted. When he reached her, he gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "So am I," he admitted, but we will figure it out together just like everything else." He kissed her then, more deeply than he had at the ceremony, and Natalie felt warmth spread through her body. His hands were gentle as he helped her unpin her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders. She helped him out of his jacket, her fingers fumbling slightly with the buttons of his shirt. They moved to the bedroom together, learning each other in the lamplight, tender and tentative but genuine. Russell was patient and attentive, and though it was awkward at times, as first times often are, there was also genuine affection and growing desire between them. Afterward, lying in Russell's bed with his arm around her and her head on his chest, Natalie felt something settle inside her. This was her home now. This man was her husband. It was all real, and it was going to be all right. The next morning, Natalie woke to find Russell already up and dressed, though he had clearly tried to be quiet. When he saw her awake, he smiled. "I have morning chores," he said, "but I thought afterward we could have breakfast together and I could teach you some things around the ranch." "How does that sound?" "Perfect," Natalie said, meaning it. Thus began her real education in ranch life. Over the following weeks, Russell taught her everything he could. She learned to cook on the wood stove, which behaved differently than the modern stove she had used in Philadelphia. She learned to make biscuits and beans, to preserve vegetables, to roast meat over the fire. She learned to milk the cow Russell traded for with a neighbor, to churn butter, to make cheese. She learned to gather eggs without startling the hens, to watch for snakes in the woodpile, to read the signs of approaching weather in the clouds and wind. She learned to ride Daisy, the gentle mare, well enough to ride around the property, though she was not confident enough for longer trips yet. She learned to mend clothes by hand, to wash laundry in the big tub, to hang it on lines to dry in the fierce sun. It was exhausting work, and there were days when Natalie fell into bed utterly spent, her hands blistered and her back aching. But there was also deep satisfaction in it. She was learning to be competent, to be useful, to be a true partner to Russell. And as the days turned into weeks, she found herself growing stronger, more capable, more confident. More than that, she found herself falling in love with her husband. It happened gradually, in small moments. The way Russell always made sure she had enough to eat before he took his own portion. The way he would stop his work to answer her questions, no matter how busy he was. The way he held her at night, warm and protective. The way he listened when she talked about her parents or her old life, never dismissing her feelings or telling her to forget the past. One evening about 6 weeks after their wedding, they were sitting on the porch together watching the sunset, a ritual they had fallen into. Russell had his arm around her shoulders, and she was leaning into his warmth, content and peaceful. Scout was sprawled at their feet, snoring softly. "Are you happy?" Russell asked quietly, as if afraid of the answer. Natalie turned to look at him, this good man who had taken a chance on a weeping stranger at a train station. "I am," she said, and realized it was absolutely true. "Happier than I have been in a long time. Are you?" "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Russell said, and he kissed her forehead tenderly. "Thank you for taking a chance on me on this life. I know it is not what you are used to." "It is better," Natalie said softly, "because I am building it with you." Life settled into a rhythm. The days were filled with work, but it was work that mattered, that had purpose and meaning. Natalie took over the household management completely, keeping the house clean, cooking their meals, tending the garden, caring for the chickens. She discovered she had a knack for it, for creating order and comfort even in this simple space. She also discovered she had a good eye for the business side of ranching. When Russell showed her his records, his accounts of cattle births and deaths, of sales and purchases, she saw immediately how to organize it better. Her education and her natural skill with numbers proved valuable, and soon she was managing all the ranch's bookkeeping, freeing Russell to focus on the physical work. They worked together to expand the garden, putting in more vegetables to reduce their need to buy supplies in town. Natalie learned to use a rifle well enough to shoot the occasional rabbit for dinner, though she never quite got comfortable with it. She made friends with Sarah Martinez and some of the other women in the area, attending occasional social gatherings in town and slowly building her own network in the community. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures, Russell finished the addition to the house. It was a proper bedroom for them, larger than the original one, with a real window facing east so they could watch the sunrise. They moved their bed into it together, and that night in their new room, Russell made love to her with a passion and tenderness that left her breathless. "I love you," he said afterward, the first time either of them had spoken those words aloud. "I think I started falling in love with you when I saw you on that train platform, looking so scared but so brave. I just did not want to pressure you by saying it too soon." Natalie felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much. I never knew marriage could be like this, that I could feel this way about someone." "Neither did I," Russell admitted. "I hoped we could be content together, maybe even friendly. But this, what we have, it is beyond anything I imagined." They held each other in the darkness, the desert wind sighing outside their window, and Natalie felt complete in a way she never had before. This was home, truly home. Not the place, though she had come to love the ranch and the wild beauty of Arizona. Not even the work or the life they were building, though that was deeply satisfying. Home was this man, this relationship, this love they had found together. The months passed, turning into a year and then another. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Russell's herd grew, his reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher spreading through the area. Natalie's careful management meant they were able to save money, to invest back into the ranch, to make improvements and additions. They added more chickens, bought a second cow, expanded the barn. They also became part of the community in a deeper way. Russell helped neighbors with difficult work, and Natalie began teaching some of the Mexican children in the area to read and write English, holding informal classes in their main room twice a week. It was deeply fulfilling work, and she loved seeing the children's faces light up when they mastered a new word or concept. 2 years after their wedding, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She told Russell one evening after supper, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment he just stared at her, and then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "Truly?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby. In about 7 months, I think," Natalie said, laughing as he picked her up and spun her around carefully. "Russell, put me down before you hurt your back." "I do not care about my back," he said, but he set her down gently, his hands resting on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby. Natalie, you have made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was oppressive, and Natalie found herself exhausted and often sick to her stomach. But Russell was endlessly patient and helpful, taking over more of her chores without complaint, bringing her cool water and forcing her to rest when she wanted to push through her fatigue. Sarah Martinez became a valued friend during this time, sharing advice and helping Natalie prepare for the birth. They sewed baby clothes together, collected supplies, discussed names. Russell built a beautiful cradle from smooth wood, spending hours on it in the evenings, sanding it until it was perfectly smooth in late winter. During a cold February night in 1886, Natalie went into labor. Russell rode hard to fetch Mrs. Rodriguez, the midwife from town, while Sarah stayed with Natalie, coaching her through the contractions. It was long and painful, and there were moments when Natalie was sure she could not endure it. But finally, as dawn broke, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Russell was there for the final moments, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, his face pale with worry and awe. When the midwife placed the baby in Natalie's arms, still slippery and squalling, Russell sat on the bed beside them with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Russell whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Absolutely perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe we made this." They named him Robert after Russell's father and called him Robbie. He was a colicky baby who cried often and slept little, but neither parent minded. Russell would walk with the baby for hours in the night, singing old songs his mother had taught him, while Natalie tried to rest. They took turns, both exhausted but utterly devoted to their son. Watching Russell with their baby, seeing his gentleness and patience, Natalie fell even more deeply in love with her husband. He was a wonderful father, never complaining about the lack of sleep or the constant demands. He would work a full day on the ranch, and then come home ready to help with the baby, changing soiled cloths and walking the floor when Robbie fussed. As Robbie grew from infant to toddler, the house filled with new sounds, with laughter and babbling and eventually words. He was a curious child into everything, and Russell built a safe pen outside where Robbie could play while they worked nearby. Scout appointed himself the baby's guardian, staying close and patient even when Robbie pulled his ears or climbed on his back. Life was busy and full, sometimes overwhelmingly so, but it was good. The ranch continued to prosper. Russell hired a young man named Tom to help with the cattle work, giving them more time with their son. Natalie's teaching expanded to include more children, and she felt proud of the difference she was making in their lives. When Robbie was 3, Natalie became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the spring of 1889, she gave birth to a daughter they named Nancy, after Natalie's mother. Nancy was a calmer baby than Robbie had been, quicker to smile and more content. Russell was equally besotted with his daughter as he had been with his son. He would hold Nancy for hours, marveling at her tiny features, singing to her in his deep voice. Robbie was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help, to bring her toys, to show her things. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. There was a drought year when they nearly lost everything, when Russell had to sell half the herd at poor prices just to survive. But they pulled through together, supporting each other through the worry and fear. There was a winter when Robbie got terribly sick, and they spent sleepless nights nursing him through a fever that seemed like it would never break. But it did, and he recovered stronger than before. There were good times too, wonderful times. Celebrations in town where the children danced and Russell danced with Natalie, holding her close and whispering how much he loved her. Quiet family evenings reading together by lamplight. Picnics by the creek during the summer monsoons when water flowed and everything turned briefly green. Christmases with simple gifts and much laughter. When Nancy was 5 and Robbie was 8, Russell expanded the house again, adding another bedroom for the children to share and a proper parlor where Natalie could hold her classes. The ranch now spanned over 500 acres with a herd of more than 200 cattle. They had a small crew of men working for them, good, reliable people who respected Russell's fairness and Natalie's kindness. Natalie sometimes thought back to that terrified girl who had stepped off the train in Nogales 17 years ago, crying and overwhelmed. She felt like a different person now, stronger and more capable than she had ever imagined she could be. This land had tested her, had demanded everything she had to give, but it had also given her so much in return. A home, a family, a purpose, a love deeper than she had known was possible. She was sitting on the porch one evening, watching Russell teach Robbie how to rope a fence post, while Nancy played with Scout in the yard. The setting sun painted everything gold and orange, and the air was cooling from the day's heat. She felt Russell's arms come around her from behind, and she leaned back into his embrace. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "Everything," Natalie said. "How far we have come, how that scared girl on the train platform became this person sitting here now, how you took a chance on me." "We took a chance on each other," Russell corrected gently. "And it was the best decision either of us ever made. I thank God every day that you answered my letter, that you were brave enough to come here, that you let me wipe your tears and take you home." "I was home the moment you said those words," Natalie said, turning in his arms to face him. "I just did not know it yet." Russell kissed her then, long and sweet, and Natalie felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt all those years ago when he had first shown her kindness. Some loves fade with time, but theirs had only grown deeper and stronger, rooted like the mesquite trees in this desert soil, enduring and resilient. As the sun finally set, and the stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, Natalie called the children inside for supper. Russell's arm stayed around her waist as they walked together, Scout trotting ahead, the sounds of their children's laughter filling the air. This was her life now, so different from anything she could have imagined back in Philadelphia. It was harder than she had expected, but also richer, fuller, more meaningful. She had come west looking for security, for a new start, for an escape from a life that had become untenable. What she had found instead was love, real and deep and lasting. She had found a partner who treated her as an equal, who valued her mind as much as her domestic skills, who never failed to show her affection and respect. She had found a home not just in a place but in a person, in the family they had built together, in the life they continued to create day by day. The years continued to flow by like water in the creek, sometimes fast and rushing, sometimes slow and peaceful, but always moving forward. Robbie grew into a tall young man with his father's serious eyes and his mother's quick mind. He took to ranching naturally, working alongside Russell from an early age, learning everything his father could teach him. Nancy was bright and curious, loving books and learning like her mother, but also fearless in a way that sometimes made Natalie's heart stop. Russell went gray at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes from years of squinting at the sun. But he was still strong and vital, still rising before dawn to work the land he loved. Natalie's hands grew rougher with time, her face tanned from years under the desert sun, but Russell still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. When Robbie was 20, he married a sweet girl from town named Clara, and they built a small house on the far edge of the ranch property. Watching her son become a man, start his own family, brought Natalie both joy and a touch of melancholy. But it was the natural order of things, and she was grateful he chose to stay close rather than seeking his fortune elsewhere. Nancy showed no interest in early marriage, to the frustration of several young men in the area. She wanted to be a teacher, she declared, a real trained teacher, not just someone who held informal classes. Russell and Natalie discussed it at length, and eventually agreed to send her to the Teachers' College in Phoenix, a decision that was both progressive and slightly controversial in their community. But they wanted their daughter to have opportunities, to make her own choices about her future. One evening, sitting on their porch as they had done countless times over the years, Russell took Natalie's hand. They were both in their 50s now, weathered by time and hard work, but still fundamentally themselves, still in love. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not answered my letter?" Russell asked. "If you had stayed in Philadelphia or answered one of the other advertisements?" Natalie squeezed his hand, her wedding ring glinting in the fading light. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with regret. I think about how different my life would have been, how I never would have known you, never had our children, never found this place. It makes me grateful, Russell. Grateful for every choice that brought me here, even the painful ones." "I think about that day at the train station," Russell said quietly. "How you were crying and looked so lost. I almost did not approach you. I thought maybe you had changed your mind, that you would want to get back on that train. But something made me step forward, made me reach out to you." "I am glad you did," Natalie said softly. "You saved me that day, Russell, not just from a bad situation, but you gave me a life worth living. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You gave me everything." "You gave me just as much," Russell insisted. "More even. This ranch would mean nothing without you. My life would mean nothing without you. You took this lonely cowboy and made him whole." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast sky. Inside the house, they could hear the ticking of the clock Russell had bought for their 10th anniversary, the soft sounds of home. In the distance, cattle lowed, and somewhere a coyote called out, wild and free. As they rose to go inside for the night, Russell pulled Natalie close and kissed the top of her head. "Welcome home," he whispered, echoing the words he had spoken so many years ago. "I am home," Natalie replied, just as she had every time he said those words over the years. "Always home as long as I am with you." They walked inside together, closing the door on another day, another chapter in their continuing story. The life they had built was not perfect, but it was theirs, earned through hard work and sustained by genuine love. From tears on a train platform to a lifetime of shared sunsets, they had created something beautiful together. And as they settled into bed that night, Russell's arm around Natalie as it had been for decades, both knew that whatever years remained to them, they would face them together. Partners in every sense of the word, bound by a love that had grown from uncertainty into something unshakable and true. The desert night was cool and peaceful, the stars brilliant overhead, and inside the ranch house that Russell had built with his own hands and Natalie had made into a true home, all was well. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, but tonight there was only contentment, only gratitude, only love. The mail-order bride who had stepped off the train in tears had found exactly what she had been seeking, though she had not known it at the time. She had found home, not in a place but in a person, in a life built day by day through trust and respect and affection that had deepened into the truest love either of them had ever known. And in the end, that made all the fear and uncertainty worth it, made every hard day and every challenge meaningful. They had taken a chance on each other, two strangers bound by letters and hope, and they had built something lasting, something real, something beautiful. That was their legacy, the story they would pass down to their children and grandchildren, the tale of how a cowboy wiped away a frightened woman's tears and welcomed her home to a life neither had expected but both had embraced with open hearts.